Next on stage, it's the lead backend developer for OpenBazaar. For those of you who don't know exactly what OpenBazaar is, it's a peer-to-peer e-commerce platform which allows for completely permissionless online trades. So think of something like an eBay, where you don't have to have eBay tell you what you can sell and what you can't sell. One can only imagine what's for sale on OpenBazaar. Please welcome Chris Pacia. Thanks, brother.
All right, I think you got the wrong one there. No, other one. Yeah, that's it. All right, so my name is Chris Pacia. I'm, as he said, a backend developer for OpenBazaar. It's an e-commerce platform. I'm also, in my kind of spare time that I have, I also work on Bitcoin Cash, so I'm kind of a Bitcoin Cash protocol developer. And I work on low-level stuff on Bitcoin Cash. And so that's primarily what this talk is going to be about. In Bitcoin Cash, we had this big, crazy incident last year around November that people coined the hash wars. I know, maybe show of hands, how many people know what I'm talking about when I say hash? Oh, wow. So, okay, so like half my talk, half this talk was just going to be kind of recapping it, but it seems like we've got a good amount of people here. But just a little bit of background on Bitcoin Cash. So Bitcoin Cash was created in August of 2017. This was really the culmination of a like 3 or 4 year long dispute in the Bitcoin community over how best to scale Bitcoin. And essentially what you had was two kind of irreconcilable camps, or two camps with irreconcilable differences, I guess you could say. And on one hand, you had the Bitcoin core people and the Bitcoin maximalists whose views were essentially to say the Bitcoin protocol itself can't scale, or at least it can't scale while remaining decentralized, that if you tried to scale it, you would centralize it. And as such, Bitcoin should be transformed into a settlement system that's kind of very slow and expensive, but we're going to layer on other payment systems of varying degrees of decentralization or centralization on top of it. This view is also very much kind of anti-hard fork, anti-making, hard forking, breaking changes to Bitcoin, in favor of kind of a more conservative approach to Bitcoin. Whereas the Bitcoin Cash view, and my view, is that scaling Bitcoin while remaining decentralized is an engineering challenge that is potentially solvable. So if we are willing to do things like make hard forking changes and update the protocol and modernize the protocol, we can potentially scale Bitcoin while remaining decentralized. And so these were really kind of irreconcilable views, and when you have this kind of view, there's only sort of one possible outcome, and that's we just go our separate ways, right? And that's kind of what happened. Bitcoin continued on their approach, transforming Bitcoin into more of a settlement system. Bitcoin Cash is exploring the scaling the system on-chain. So that's a little bit of a background. So given that, the Bitcoin Cash developers agreed to semi-annual hard forks. So we're going to make changes to the protocol necessary to help scale it and improve it about every 6 months. And we've had about three or four hard forks so far in Bitcoin Cash to do this. This started, or the latest one was scheduled for November 15th of last year. And so this is when all of this craziness kind of happened, was surrounding this particular hard fork. So the main character in this story here is this guy, right? Fake Toshi, all right? So for those who don't know who this guy, I mean, he's by far and away the most toxic person in the entire cryptocurrency space. There's not even a close second. This guy has been caught red-handed, lying on numerous occasions. He's backdated blog posts, fake PGP keys, plagiarized all kinds of stuff. He's a serial plagiarizer too, by the way. He publishes these like academic style papers, and just copies and pastes whole sections from other works of other academics without crediting them. And not only does he not credit them, but he'll go in and change a couple words in the paragraph to their synonym to try and avoid plagiarism detectors, right? Like, that's how bad this guy is. I mean, it's just, he's just like the worst person on the planet, okay? So, I mean, and just recently, so he's still making claims that he's Satoshi Nakamoto, and just recently, this was like a day or two before we came out here, he said, well, I actually created Bitcoin in 2001. Now, those of you will remember the Bitcoin white paper was published in 2008. So he claims that he actually wrote the Bitcoin white paper in 2001 under a different title called like Blacknet or something. So this was an abstract. This is the abstract from the Bitcoin white paper that he claims he published in 2001. And note, this is the entirety of his evidence was just this image, right? Like, oh, I'm Satoshi Nakamoto. Here's an image that proves it. So what happened, people actually went and remembered, hey, wait a second, the real Satoshi actually had a draft of the Bitcoin white paper. And you can see on the left-hand side is the draft. And he emailed that draft in 2008. He emailed it to like Wei Dai and other people. And he got feedback on that draft. And then he proceeded to make edits, and then the edits were actually what got published as the actual Bitcoin white paper. So on the right-hand side is the edited version that was ultimately published. What Craig Wright copied and pasted and claimed he wrote in 2001, this thing, is the edited version, right? So we know this edited version wasn't edited until 2008, so he couldn't possibly have written this in 2001. So he just caught red-handed in yet another lie. And this is just one of like 15, 20, 30 different lies that he's been caught red-handed in. So just to give you an example of what kind of guy this is, I asked the community to help find some quotes. You know, we all know Ross Ulbricht. His mom, Lynn, is, you know, right outside here. He was asked, what do you think about Ross Ulbricht? He said he got what he deserved, right? I only ever worked for the prosecution. Silk Road was poison to me. Anonymity is a shield of cowards. Okay, this was another one. I block anarchists. They are fools. I'm going to be more ruthless than Mao and Stalin if I'm ever crossed. Okay, so he created this company called nChain. nChain, basically the entire business model for nChain is they're a patent troll company, right? So they go around patent. So in addition to everything else this guy is, he's a huge patent troll too. So they go around patenting like everything and everything under the sun in the Bitcoin space, including stuff that people have been using for years. They're just filing patents on it to try and extract illegitimate rent from people. So this leads us to the November 15th hard fork in Bitcoin Cash. We were planning on adding something, oh look, that didn't format right, something called op-check data sig, which is most basic functionality as you can have in a blockchain. It's surprising that Bitcoin didn't actually have this when it started. It's an opcode in the scripting language that just checks a digital signature. It's as basic functionality as you can possibly get. This functionality exists in Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies. I know Blockstream has it in their Element sidechain. I think the Liquid sidechain probably has it too. Basic functionality. So we're just going to add this into Bitcoin Cash as a bundle hard fork for November 15th. And basically Craig flipped his lid because he claimed to have patents on something similar. So he didn't want us giving away for free what he felt he could extract illegitimate rent from, and licensing fees for people by including this in there. So Craig tried to kind of muscle the Bitcoin Cash developers. So we had two main development groups at this point in time. There was Bitcoin ABC. They work on one implementation of the Bitcoin Cash protocol. There was another one, Bitcoin Unlimited. And he basically tried pressuring both of them into essentially caving to him. And I know basically Bitcoin Unlimited, I think, was the first one to just tell him go F himself, right? I think they had received a little bit of money from Craig and nChain. He's trying to throw a lot of money around. They basically told him, go take your money. We don't want it. We don't want to have anything to do with you. So, just screw off. And then ultimately Bitcoin ABC did the same thing. And basically when this happened, Craig Wright threw like an adult temper tantrum, right? He said, I'm going to destroy them. Remember the whole, I'm going to be more ruthless than Mao and Stalin. So he decided he was going to try to, it was at this moment he decided he needed to completely, essentially take over and centralize Bitcoin Cash under his control. Just do like a hostile takeover of the system, put it under his control so he could dictate how it operated and how it functioned. So this is Craig Wright's plan to take over and centralize Bitcoin Cash. So I'll go through this, what is essentially the scheme that he concocted. So step one was fork the Bitcoin Cash software and change the consensus rules. And so this was easy to do, anybody can do it. So they created the software they created, they called it Bitcoin SV. It was Satoshi's vision, if this is not ironic. And they changed a couple consensus rules. Like, for example, they removed the opcheck data sig that we included, and then they put in a couple other things, some small changes. And then they released this software. Now, at the time they released it, this whole hard fork was scheduled for November 15th, so like they kept the same activation rules and everything for November 15th. So we're all in like this collision course for November 15th. Step two, buy up huge amounts of mining power. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit scary because now Craig claims to be a billionaire. I'm pretty sure that's another thing he's lying about. I doubt he's a billionaire. But he is friends with this guy, Calvin Ayre, who is a billionaire, notice how fake this is with the black and yellow, you know? So Calvin is an actual billionaire, and they're like best friends, and I think Craig is mostly just spending Calvin's money, right? They're just burning through Calvin's billions, buying up all this mining power and all of this stuff. Step three, once they've bought up enough mining power, basically attack Bitcoin Cash with it. So they wanted to launch a 51% attack against Bitcoin Cash, and with that you can do several different things. You can mine empty blocks, you can double spend exchanges. This is Craig saying, watch us double spend and reorg exchanges. By the way, this is wildly illegal, right? I mean, this is criminal activities, talking about stealing from exchanges, basically. And so, I mean, here he's just bragging, we're gonna steal from exchanges and cause them to lose millions of dollars, and we're just gonna basically destroy. At one point, Craig basically said, either I win or I'm gonna burn everything to the ground, right? This is the mentality this guy had. And then step four, so if we look at the first three are at least plausible, and they did in fact make it to step three. The one that's completely implausible, step four, is to pitch their new software, their new shitcoin, as the real Bitcoin Cash, right? So after they've destroyed Bitcoin Cash, after they've left this smoking crater in the ground, then they're gonna come by and say, oh, hi, hey, by the way, remember that coin that you guys used to use and you kind of liked? Here's a new one, and we're gonna just pretend it's Bitcoin Cash, you know? And he really thought that he was just gonna be given the Bitcoin Cash ticker symbol, and people were just gonna hand them the BCH ticker symbol, as if it's as if ticker symbols are handed out as the spoils of war, right? So the step four in this couldn't possibly have happened. This wasn't going to happen. There was no chance that the exchanges were gonna give him the Bitcoin Cash ticker symbol after he caused them to lose millions of dollars, after he destroyed a cryptocurrency that many people were using. There was no chance that the users of Bitcoin Cash would just migrate over and use the other cryptocurrency just because Craig Wright destroyed the one. Now they're just gonna migrate onto the one that's controlled completely by him. But nonetheless, he's irrational enough to think that this was actually plausible. And then number five, he didn't want to just stop at Bitcoin Cash. He wanted to go around and repeat this for all the other ones too. So they were going to target Litecoin, Ethereum, and then ultimately the big one was Bitcoin. They wanted to go and do the same thing to Bitcoin that they ultimately did to Bitcoin Cash, and that is essentially destroy it and then pitch Bitcoin SV, which is completely under their control, as the new Bitcoin, okay? So Bitcoin Cash was just supposed to be the first in the line of coins that they were going to attack in an attempt to basically try and take over and centralize the entire cryptocurrency space. So now this was actually a pretty credible threat here. So before the fork happened, they were mining with, Craig and Calvin were mining with about 3.5 exahashes worth of mining power. It ended up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 of all the mining power on Bitcoin Cash they controlled. So meaning They could have done a 51% attack right at this point if they wanted to. They had the mining power to do it. Bizarrely, they decided to wait for November 15th to try and do this. But they had the hashing power, at least initially, to do so. And so this was like a pretty credible threat. I mean, they were looking at, like, they actually had the hashing power to do this. So we put together, we kind of Bitcoin Cash supporters, we had a war room that we put together where we kind of strategized our defense against this thing. And we had many contingency plans in place, many of which never came to light. Like we never had to use them because we ended up, I'll give away the punchline, we ended up winning pretty decisively. But many of these contingency plans, we didn't even have to deploy or put in place. And so I'm not gonna mention what they were, but, because maybe we'll have to use them again sometime later. But the number one strategy, so like the first strategy on our list of defenses was to just try and get people to spin up as much hashing power as we possibly could to defend Bitcoin Cash. And believe it or not, we had people coming in, and this, I mean, kind of never really came out, I'm not gonna mention names, but we had people coming in who were not even part of the Bitcoin Cash community and really not even rooting for Bitcoin Cash, just coming in, dropping like $1 million to defend Bitcoin Cash, just saying, I just don't want this asshole to win, right? So on November 15th, on the day of the fork, we dropped 9 exahash on the Bitcoin Cash blockchain. And this was like complete shock and awe for Craig Wright. Remember, for weeks leading up to this fork, he was talking about how he has the numbers, he has the hashing power, he can't wait to destroy it, basically bragging about how easy it was going to be for him to destroy Bitcoin Cash. And he was completely unprepared for 9 exahashes. I think someone calculated the numbers. It was the equivalent of something like 20 shipping containers worth of Bitcoin miners were spun up to defend Bitcoin Cash. And this was using like more electricity than like 2 Hoover dams, okay? So basically, this was the end. So once we hit this point, the end result of this was Bitcoin SV, okay? Bitcoin SV, basically their software ended up forking off. And Craig wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't planning on creating a new coin. He had no wallets for Bitcoin SV. He had no block explorers. It wasn't on any exchanges. There was no infrastructure support for it because he thought he was just going to take over all the infrastructure for Bitcoin Cash. So Bitcoin SV is probably the only cryptocurrency that was kind of ever created by accident or unintentionally created. It was the byproduct of him failing to take over Bitcoin Cash in this manner. So what is the result? Well, predictably, he decides to sue to try to get us to roll back the chain. Now, you talk about fundamentally not understanding how cryptocurrency works. I mean, first off, who's he going to sue? So he's just picking random people at random. Roger Ver, Bitmain. Bitmain like didn't even do anything in this, right? Like Roger Ver, Kraken, what's Kraken got to do with any of this stuff? He's just picking random people and suing them. And what he's asking for is to try to get the federal judge to declare that the blockchain has to be rolled back, right? So can you imagine this? Here we are, we're like 3 months later, at the point right now, by the time the ruling would ever be handed down, we're probably looking at years later. I mean, what are they gonna do? Roll back years worth of the blockchain and undo all those transactions? That's absurd. And I mean, not only is that in and of itself absurd, but who's gonna write the code, right? Are they gonna enslave somebody and force them to write the code to do this? And even if they did write the code, nobody's gonna run it, right? That's how the software works. I decide what to run, you guys decide what to run. Nobody here is gonna run the US government approved version of Bitcoin Cash. So I mean, this was just absolutely ridiculous. Here's Bitcoin SV. So they're mining Bitcoin SV at a massive loss today. This is a form of an economic attack. Basically, if you can mine a cryptocurrency at a big loss, you can force all other miners to take a loss in hopes that they won't mine. And if you do that, then you can control basically 100% of mining. So this is how they're retaining 100% control over Bitcoin Bitcoin SV mining today by mining at a big loss intentionally. This is Calvin Ayre. Bitcoin SV is government friendly, and so is the community that supports it. So that tells you all you need to know there. So I'll just kind of quickly go through some lessons that we can take away. There's probably a bunch more lessons that we can have, but I'd say the first is, we really should have kicked Craig Wright out of the Bitcoin Cash community at the start. Like, I think a lot of us said, well, here's a guy who agrees with us. He kind of knows some stuff that make it seem like he plausibly could be Satoshi, but there's all this other stuff that isn't. So a lot of us, and I'll put myself in this category, I didn't speak out against Craig Wright until it was too late. And if you don't do that, it's going to come back to bite you, as we saw here. And we really needed to purge Craig Wright from our community from the beginning. And this is a lesson that can be drawn not just for other cryptocurrency communities, but for like the broader, libertarian community, anarchist community. If you've got these toxic people and you just tolerate them because they kind of agree with you, it's going to come back and bite you at some point. It's better to just kind of ostracize them right out of the gate. And then I would say, lastly, proof of work is, wrong slide. Anyway, the other one that I wanted to point out is security, blockchain security is not really a solved problem yet. The fact that they were at least able to pose a credible threat of destroying Bitcoin Cash, and it took great effort, and a lot of people had to put up big money to defend Bitcoin Cash, I think shows that this is not really a solved problem. And if you look at Craig and Calvin, were able to acquire by themselves about 5% of all the SHA-256 mining power out there, which means if they had just expended, let's say, 10 times more money than they actually did, they could have done the same thing to Bitcoin, BTC. So it's not out of the reach of what is possible. We tend to think of like Bitcoin's the most secure blockchain, but you get a couple irrational billionaires like these people and they start banding together, it's within the reach of them to actually attack the chain. And we're not even talking about state actors. So the lesson there is, as developers, as researchers in the space, we shouldn't just assume we've got security solved, and we need to be taking steps to try and figure out ways that we can harden these coins and strengthen them going forward. So thank you very much.
Chris, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Anarchapulco, it's so hype, I'm trying to tell ya. This the event of the year and best vacation ever. Ron Potter, Jeffrey Tucker, just to name a few. Get your tickets, you don't want to miss it. You should roll through. Talking politics to health and self-improvement to investing. So many things, not one thing. Learn how to live life unchained, yeah. 4 days vibing on the beach, time to connect. All about growth, way more than a conference. This is Anarchapulco, yeah. Let's go.
You ain't seen nothing yet.